The courtroom was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that weighs heavy in the air, pressing down on everyone in the room like a storm about to break. The judge, an older man with graying hair and sharp eyes, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. His gaze swept over the courtroom, landing on the defendant, a middle-aged man in a suit who sat stiffly, his lawyer whispering something in his ear. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, from the back of the room, a young black girl, no older than 12 or 13, stood up abruptly. Her braids swung as she took a step forward, her hands clenched at her sides. All eyes turned to her, murmurs rippling through the courtroom. No one was supposed to speak out of turn, especially not a child. The judge lifted a hand to silence the murmurs, his brow furrowing in annoyance. "Sit down, young lady," he said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. But she didn't sit. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she took another step forward, and, in a voice that was clear, unwavering, and filled with something that sent a chill through the room, she spoke one word. A single word. The judge's expression froze. His mouth parted slightly, his face drained of all color, and for a moment, it was as if the entire world had stopped spinning. The gavel, once steady in his hand, trembled slightly as his grip loosened. The lawyers exchanged confused glances. The defendant's face twisted into something between shock and horror. The bailiff, who had been standing at ease, suddenly straightened, his hand moving toward his belt as if expecting something far worse to come. The girl's mother, seated near the front, gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. She knew. Oh, she knew that her daughter had just said something that changed everything. Something that no one in that room had been prepared to hear. The judge swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what had just been said. What did you say?" he asked, but his voice lacked the authority it carried just moments before. The girl didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. The damage had already been done. Whatever that one word was, it had shattered the courtroom's fragile sense of order. The murmurs grew louder now. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A reporter in the back furiously scribbled notes. The tension was no longer just thick. It was suffocating. The judge hesitated, then looked over at the bailiff. "Clear the courtroom," he ordered, his voice tight. "Now!" But before the bailiff could act, the girl took another step forward. Her face was calm, but her eyes held something far beyond her years. And in that moment, everyone in that room understood one thing. Whatever was happening, whatever had just been said, it wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The courtroom remained frozen in that eerie, stunned silence. The judge still hadn't regained his color, his fingers gripping the edge of his bench as if to steady himself. The bailiff hesitated, eyes darting between the girl and the judge, uncertain whether to act. The girl's mother rose halfway from her seat, a mix of fear and urgency flashing in her eyes. The girl didn't move. She didn't look scared. If anything, she seemed eerily calm, as though she knew exactly what she was doing, as though she knew the weight of that one word she had spoken. A man sitting near the back, dressed in a dark suit, leaned forward slightly. His face was unreadable, but his posture changed, as if he had just realized something important. Another woman, clutching her purse on her lap, whispered something to the person beside her, her fingers trembling slightly. "Clear the courtroom," the judge repeated, but his voice was quieter now. Shaky. The bailiff finally reacted, stepping forward with authority. "Everyone needs to leave now," he ordered. His voice carried more strength than the judge's did at that moment. A few people hesitated before shuffling toward the exit, casting curious glances at the girl as they went. But the girl's mother didn't move. "My daughter stays with me," she said firmly, her voice shaking just a little. The bailiff turned to the judge for direction. The judge was still staring at the girl, as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then, with a deep breath, he nodded slightly. Fine. Everyone else? Out. The courtroom emptied in a slow, uneasy shuffle. Lawyers, reporters, even the defendant and his legal team were ushered outside. The doors shut with a heavy thud. Now, it was just the judge, the bailiff, the girl, and her mother. The air felt heavier now, like the walls were pressing in. The judge leaned forward slightly, his knuckles white where they gripped the bench. "What did you just say?" he asked again, quieter this time. The girl still didn't answer. She just looked at him. The judge glanced at the bailiff, then at the girl's mother. "Do you know what she meant by that?" The mother hesitated, swallowing hard. She glanced at her daughter, then back at the judge. I don't know." But her voice lacked conviction, and the judge caught it. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You do." The mother's lips parted slightly, but she didn't respond. The judge exhaled sharply and turned back to the girl. "Tell me where you heard that word." For the first time, the girl's expression shifted. Not fear, not uncertainty, just something unreadable, like she was weighing her options. Then she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I heard it where I wasn't supposed to." The judge's breath hitched just slightly, and the bailiff took an uneasy step back. The girl's mother squeezed her daughter's hand. The judge adjusted his glasses, his hands still shaking slightly. "You shouldn't know that word," he said, almost to himself. The girl tilted her head. "But I do." A long, heavy silence followed. The judge leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his mouth. His eyes flickered toward the closed doors of the courtroom, as if considering whether to bring someone else in. But then he shook his head. Whatever this was, whatever this girl had said, it wasn't something he wanted more people to hear. Finally, he took a deep breath. "Tell me everything you know." The girl's mother stiffened. "No, she's just a child." The judge's gaze hardened. She might be a child, but she just said something that no one outside a very specific group should even be aware of. The girl watched him closely. "I know more than one word." The judge's face darkened, and for a brief moment, real fear flickered in his eyes. The bailiff tensed, looking between the two of them. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Who told you?" The girl didn't answer right away. Then, finally, she said, "No one." The judge clenched his jaw. "That's not possible." But the way she looked at him made his breath catch again. It wasn't the look of a child who was lying. It wasn't even the look of a child at all. The girl's mother grabbed her hand. "We're leaving," she said firmly, standing up. The bailiff stepped forward. "Ma'am, I don't care what you think," the mother snapped, her voice breaking slightly. "This was a mistake. We're done here." The judge didn't stop them as they turned toward the door. But just before they could reach it, the girl glanced back over her shoulder, her eyes meeting his. "You know what happens next," she said softly. The judge's breath stilled in his chest. The girl held his gaze for a moment longer before turning back around. Then, without another word, she and her mother walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind nothing but silence and the lingering chill of something no one could quite explain. The judge sat motionless long after the girl and her mother had left. The room felt different now, as if the air itself had thickened with something unseen but heavy. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably beside him, his usually steady presence now filled with unease. "That kid," the bailiff muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "She rattled you." The judge didn't respond immediately. His fingers tapped the wooden surface of his bench, the only sound in the silent courtroom. His mind was racing. That word, the word the girl had spoken, it wasn't something a child should know. It wasn't something anyone outside a very controlled circle should even be aware of. She shouldn't have known, the judge finally said, more to himself than to the bailiff. And yet, she did. The bailiff hesitated. Maybe she just heard it somewhere. Maybe someone in her family. No. The judge cut him off, shaking his head. That word doesn't just float around. It's buried, hidden. People who know it either protect it or fear it. The bailiff exhaled, glancing toward the door the girl had just walked out of. What now? The judge didn't answer. Instead, he stood, moving toward the back chambers. I need to make a call. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the girl's mother gripped her daughter's hand tightly, walking briskly toward their car. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She knew they had stayed too long. The moment her daughter had opened her mouth in that courtroom, she had felt the shift. The kind of shift that couldn't be undone. What were you thinking? She whispered sharply as they reached the car, unlocking the doors with shaky hands. The girl slid into the passenger seat calmly, her face unreadable. I had to. Her mother turned to face her, her hands gripping the steering wheel before she even started the car. You don't just stand up in a courtroom and say something like that. That word. You know what it means. You know what it does. The girl finally looked at her, her expression softer now. I know. But he needed to hear it. Her mother let out a sharp breath, then started the car. As they pulled away from the courthouse, she checked the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be following them. Inside the courthouse, the judge sat at his desk in his private chambers, his phone pressed against his ear. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. A voice, calm but firm, answered. This is unexpected. The judge inhaled deeply. We have a problem. There was a pause. Go on. A girl, the judge said. A child. She knows. The voice, on the other end, didn't respond right away. Then, finally, a single word. Impossible. I thought so too, the judge admitted. Until she said it. Another silence. Then, did anyone else hear? The courtroom was full, the judge said. But they didn't understand. Only I did. A slow exhale came through the phone. Find out where she learned it. The call ended, leaving the judge staring at his phone, his mind spinning. At the same time, miles away, the girl and her mother pulled into their driveway. The house was quiet, the neighborhood still. The mother cut the engine and turned to her daughter. Tell me everything. Now, the girl sighed, looking down at her hands. I don't know how to explain it, she said finally. It's like I didn't just hear it. I felt it. Her mother stiffened. What do you mean you felt it? The girl hesitated. Like it was waiting for me to say it. Her mother's grip tightened on the steering wheel again. She had spent years protecting her daughter from things she shouldn't know, shielding her from a world she wasn't meant to be part of. And yet, somehow, the truth had still found her. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out and froze when she saw the number. No name, just a number she hadn't seen in years. Her stomach twisted as she answered. A deep voice on the other end spoke. We need to talk. She swallowed. It's already started, hasn't it? A pause. Then, yes. The mother's eyes flickered toward her daughter, who was watching her closely. Then we don't have much time.